Hi guys, it's me, HD, and welcome to this review of the first day of the final pre-season test in 2026. Day one finished a couple hours ago. It was just a normal day of testing. Not really much headline stuff happened on the track regarding the teams. Certain teams were not the most reliable. The team you can see on your screen here, Aston Martin, once again had a bit of a bad day. Certain teams spent a bit too long in the garage than they would have liked and lost out on doing maybe some extra laps that they preferred to have done. But in terms of news, more has happened off the track today rather than on it. On it, it's been a normal day. No, massive issues really, other than Lance Stroll spinning into the gravel on the exit of turn, I think 11 it was, going into that fast left-hander uphill towards the end of the middle sector. And that was, we believe, a car issue, which caused that spin for Stroll. So, yeah, still not good for Aston Martin. But other than that, yeah, it was a normal day. The pace has increased in terms of, if you look at all the teams, and we will obviously get into the lap times in a moment, pretty much all the teams are doing the best lap times they've done so far in pre-season testing. The best lap time of the first test in Bahrain was a 1:33.6 by Kimi Antonelli. Today, it was I think 1:33.2 by George Russell. So getting quicker. I do think they'll get into the 1:32s by the end of preseason testing. I think they'll probably get to about a 32.6 or a 32.7. I think that's definitely doable in the final couple days of preseason testing. So, yeah, they will get quicker. They will definitely dip into the 1:32s. Whether they get as low as a 32.6 or 32.7, we'll have to see. But, yeah, they're pretty close, I would say, to what is a pretty good pace for, a pre-season testing session around this track. They're definitely not sandbagging heavily. Obviously, they are sandbagging still to an extent, but they're not far off what they really maybe will be doing at this Grand Prix here in Bahrain in a couple months' time when we come back here. So yeah, the pace is decent. In terms though of and today I watched obviously quite a few hours of pre-season testing. In terms of seeing the cars on track, having a look at the lap times, even though the lap times, yes, they don't matter massively. As the days go on, you can start to see the field take shape in terms of who is most likely where. Compared to how I felt the pecking order probably was last week, so far after day one, doesn't feel like it's really any different, other than Aston Martin probably being a bit quicker now than they were at the end of the first test, which is good to see. And also, let's be honest, we would expect that Aston Martin would show a bit more pace at this point. So, yeah, pecking order wise, there's no real difference. There's no surprise that we've seen so far on the first day of this final test. Obviously, we've still got 2 more days to go, tomorrow and Friday. Who knows, maybe one of the midfield teams will come out and really show a lot of speed that really surprises people. But yeah, so far it's looking pretty much as it did last week in Bahrain. So yeah, pretty much a normal day of pre-season testing. Before we get on to the lap times, and I will obviously do, as I usually have done so far in pre-season, I'll do a roundup of the teams and just quickly round up how their day's gone and what they should be looking to do going into day two. The two bits of news away from the circuit, which have been probably the biggest, most important news really of the day. One, the start procedure is going to be different for 2026 because of this turbo lag issue, which, if you watched preseason testing last week in Bahrain, there was an issue of cars not being able to get their turbos going and get off the line maybe as quickly as they want to, or as quickly obviously as they would do last year, even though the engines were different. Yeah, the FIA have changed the start procedure, so now once all the cars line up, teams at the back of the field will have a bit longer, a few seconds longer, to get their turbos going, to be able then to make sure that they will be able to actually get off the grid when the lights go out at the start of the race. So it's only going to be a few seconds longer, essentially, the start procedure. The way, the lights, 5 lights going on and the lights going out and all the cars going away, that will remain the same, but it will just be a slight bit longer to make sure that all the teams can get their turbos going and make sure that they will actually be able to get off the line in a way that isn't massively unsafe in terms of certain cars, stuck on the grid and then getting smashed into from behind. We've seen that happen a lot of times in F2 in recent years, and we really don't want to see that happen in Formula One. Obviously, we have had it happen in Formula One a few times, but a bit more sparse than it has been in Formula Two. The other bit of news, probably the biggest bit of news, is to do with the Mercedes compression engine ratio controversy. Now, I talked about this in a video that I did about a month ago, I think it was now, where I talked about this controversy that's arisen over the compression ratio of the Mercedes engine. It's supposed to be, the compression ratio is supposed to be 16:1 of the power units when when it's operating, but apparently Mercedes' engine was able to expand in its ratio to 18:1 when it actually got hot, obviously when it was working at its hardest, which apparently is giving it more power. It's been announced that they are going to start doing a new test to measure this compression ratio stuff in August at the start of the summer break. So basically, the new test is what they're going to do is they're going to measure the engine's compression ratio at the cold temperature and then at a hotter temperature, or a more representative temperature of when the engines are actually running. And it's only slightly different to how that test was being run. As of now, the compression ratio of the power units is measured when it's cold. So the only difference really is that they're adding a hot test as long with a cold test. So if Mercedes' power unit is indeed exceeding that ratio when it's hot, then they'll have to change that power unit going into the second half of the season after the summer break. But if they can pass that hot test, then there's no issue. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But obviously, that's, a few months down the line. If Mercedes dominate the first half of the season, then it won't really matter that much going into the second half of the season, because the championship may already be wrapped up. We don't know, going into the final, what would it be, 8-9 races of the season after the summer break's completed. So we'll see what effect that has, after the summer break and going forward in general. But yeah, until August, I think 1st, it's going to remain as is. And I think the reason it's going to remain as is because there's not really enough time to change those procedures in terms of how they measure the compression ratio of the power units. Just not enough time to be able to change it in a way that's going to work, considering how close we are to the season. Remember, we're only 2.5 weeks away from the first Grand Prix. So it would be a real rush if they rushed something in the next couple weeks. So yeah, it is that's what it looks like is going to be the new measurement, and we'll see whether Mercedes can get through that, or whether, again, they'll have to change their power units, and if they do, whether it will make a massive difference or not. But yeah, like I said, on track, it was pretty much just a normal day. Let's go through, though, the lap times of day one. And here are your day one lap times. And these are, by the way, the best times per team. Not just the, best 10 times. I've gone for the, best times per team, obviously for all 11 Formula One teams. And yeah, George Russell, 133.4 actually it was. I said earlier it was a 33.2. It wasn't. It was a 33.4. I mistakenly thought it was 33.2. Which is 133.4. That is about 3.5 or just over 3.5 seconds away from pole position at this same track back in April of last year. So, considering where we're at this point of pre-season, lap time wise, I don't think that's really that bad at all, that type of lap time. He was only just, Russell, ahead of the McLaren of Oscar Piastri, who had a good day today. McLaren looking good. Both Mercedes-powered teams there looking pretty strong. Leclerc then in third. Isaac Hadjar in fourth. Hadjar did the entire day in the Red Bull, so no Max Verstappen, but Max will be in the car tomorrow, so we'll get a much more representative showing as to how quick Red Bull are. And then a big drop-off to the midfield. Carlos Sainz then with Williams, 1.6 seconds off the pace. Williams, fifth fastest today out of all the teams. Only just ahead of Alpine, who were pretty good today. The Alpine has been pretty good looking in testing so far in terms of just the handling, and Alpine sound pretty confident as well. Bortoletto then in the Audi. Audi looking decent at this stage, even though apparently the drivers are not as satisfied with where Audi are at this point. I think they were probably expecting a bit more at this early point of 2026. But I mean, Audi look like they're probably one of the 3 or 4 top midfield teams. So, they're not in a bad position or anything. And we have to remember Audi are probably going to make the most progress of any midfield team over the course of this season. So I think Audi are in a decent spot at the minute. Then you've got a bit of a drop-off to Lawson in the RB, Behrman in the Haas, Stroll then in the Aston Martin, 2.5 seconds off the pace. That's the best pace Aston Martin have showed so far. 135.9, which is still pretty slow, but they are improving at least. And then you've got a few tenths of a second drop off to Valtteri Bottas in the Cadillac, 3.3 seconds off the pace. I've got to say, though, with Bottas, I mean, maybe, he was pushing really hard towards the end of the day. We don't know. But to be around 3 seconds off the pace of the Mercedes for Cadillac, I actually think is quite good. Considering Mercedes are, as strong as they are, but also Cadillac, completely new team. Pace-wise, even though they are probably still the slowest team, which I don't think is any surprise to anyone, they're a lot closer, I think, to the midfield than maybe a lot of people expected. They're still, again, probably the slowest team, but they are not a million miles away. So, a decent start there from Cadillac. But in terms of the top of the timesheets, Mercedes and McLaren, very, very close. Russell did the best lap time there towards the final, what was it? It was like the final, I think, 20, 30 minutes or so of the session. I'm just looking here at the sector time data on my end from the testing session. In the first sector, the Mercedes is very quick, nearly 2 tenths quicker than the McLaren. In the middle sector, though, the McLaren very, very quick, quarter of a second quicker than anything else. And then Mercedes and McLaren pretty much as quick as each other through the final sector. So in terms of, let's say, for example, we don't know this for sure, but let's say Mercedes and McLaren were running the exact same fuel load and engine mode on those two best laps stated respectively. It appears that in the or down the straights and in the slower speed corners, the Mercedes looks to be better, but then in the higher speed corners or the parts of the track where aero is a bit more important, that's when McLaren are at their best. So that's what looks to be the difference between those two teams, which is kind of what I was guessing with the difference between Mercedes and McLaren. It does feel like the McLaren, in terms of the aero side, look to be stronger, but Mercedes just a bit stronger efficiency-wise in the either in the slow corners or the down the straights, as obviously the works team. In terms of Ferrari with their sector times, in the first sector, Ferrari 0.3 off Mercedes, but then in the middle sector, a lot closer to Mercedes, basically doing the same pace as Mercedes, but still quarter of a second away from McLaren. And then in the final sector, they are within 1/10 of Mercedes, who were the quickest team. So from Ferrari's perspective, looks like they are closer to Mercedes and McLaren through the corners rather than down the straights, and obviously, different power units. So yeah, it doesn't feel like the Ferrari engine is quite on the level of the Mercedes one. And then for Red Bull, a lot harder to tell because Hadjar was in the car today, but Hadjar was only 1/10 off Russell in the first sector and was actually the second quickest car in the first sector today in testing. Then in the middle sector, the Red Bull drops off a lot and was actually 0.8 of a second in the hands of Hadjar away from Piastri. And then in the final sector, it was about 1/10.5, the difference between Hadjar and Antonelli up front. So with the Red Bull, it appears that they are very quick down the straights, which is kind of what we were already hearing about their engine, which has been so impressive. But in the corners, it does feel like they're lacking quite a bit to be on the level of, say, McLaren or Mercedes. So in terms of those front four teams, that's kind of where it feels like we're at. Mercedes have got the best balance between aero and straight line speed. McLaren a bit stronger in the corners than they are down the straights, which is basically what we saw last season, but it doesn't appear they have the fastest car like they did this time last year. Ferrari, not as strong in a straight line as Mercedes, but definitely closer through the corners and more competitive through the corners than they are down the straights, which, that is, say, giving them a chance to fight. The Mercedes-powered teams there, Mercedes and McLaren. And then for Red Bull, like I said, very quick down the straights, but in the corners, doesn't feel like they're on the same level as McLaren and Mercedes, or even maybe Ferrari right now. So, work to do for Red Bull to improve, I think, the downforce of their car. But from the engine side for Red Bull, it does feel like they are in a very good position. So if they can find some upgrades to, improve the car through the corners, that Red Bull could be a very, very fast car this year. So, yeah, we'll see what they can do between now and Melbourne. I think one thing, though, looking at these lap times that has become clear, and I know people will say, oh, it's only testing, but I think it's even been talked about in the paddock, and it's not really a surprise, but there is a pretty big gap between the front four teams and the midfield. Last year, we had, the front four teams and then the midfield. Occasionally, you get Williams up in there. Obviously, we had Racing Bulls get a podium. Aston Martin had a couple of races where they were really strong. Haas had a couple of races where they were fighting, with McLarens and Mercedes cars. So yeah, it was a bit closer last season. But this season, it really does feel like there is a big gap between the midfield and the front four teams. To the point of, if you guys remember 2018, 2019, that type of era where you would have three front running teams, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, and then you would have like a second lap at least difference between them and the quickest midfield car. It really feels like we've gone back to that, which is sad, but it's expected, because when you get a big set of regulations changing, that's just what happens. We've seen it so many times. Even at the start of 2022, we saw a big gap between the front running teams and the midfield, the upper midfield, which at the time was like McLaren and Alpine and Aston Martin at the time. So yeah, it's not a surprise, but it is disappointing. But in terms of the midfield, Williams and Alpine, not really a surprise that they're looking competitive. They both are Mercedes powered. I've got to say though, I think Alpine might just be the strongest of the midfield teams. And I said this coming into the season, I really had a good feeling about Alpine this season. I did with Williams as well, but Williams don't appear to have got the regulations as maybe correct as they hoped, and are not quite on the pace of the front running teams. But Alpine really, to me, feel like they've got a strong car, a strong midfield car. And obviously, Colapinto did a pretty decent job out there, but we know Pierre Gasly, his better teammate, can go a lot quicker. So yeah, Alpine, I've got a very good feeling about them. Audi looking decent, and then a bit of a drop off then to Racing Bulls and Haas. Haas, I don't think really pushed that hard today. I think they were really focusing on the long runs. Apparently, Haas are going to do some lower fuel runs tomorrow, so we'll see how they do. With Aston Martin, yeah, 2.5 seconds off the pace. That's the closest they've been so far. And that's with Lance Stroll, so we know Alonso could probably go half a second quicker. So they have found a lot more pace, but is that because they've improved, or is that because they've just turned the engine up more? We don't know. I think it's probably because they've just turned the engine up a bit more and found extra performance pretty much through that. I think at this point, as long as they're reliable enough, I think Aston Martin are ahead of Cadillac. I don't think they're quite that slow. I think the only way they're going to be that slow is if they have to limit the amount of power they use in Melbourne, to avoid, having a massive failure for whatever reason. So, yeah, Aston Martin, they're in the midfield pack, but I think they're definitely looking a bit more towards the rear of the midfield pack. I'd say Williams, Alpine, and Audi definitely are faster than Aston Martin, and probably Haas as well. I think at best, Aston Martin are probably fighting with Racing Bulls for who is the 9th or 10th fastest team. That's what it looks to me at the moment. But like I said, they have improved. They're not as slow as Cadillac, which it looked like that last week. They looked like they were even slower than Cadillac. So that's an improvement. And again, we know Alonso can go a few tenths quicker than Stroll. So it's getting better for Aston Martin. They're not a million miles away like it felt like they were last week, where even Stroll came out and said, we're missing 4 seconds. I wonder what he'd say now. Because they've clearly found, at least a couple seconds, it feels like, in a week. So, yeah, it's improving, but they are still in a bad situation. Still not able to do as many laps as others. Car is still on edge in terms of the handling. And still, I think they're really struggling to figure out, Aston Martin, just what this car's about. So I think it's going to take quite a few races for them to figure it out and to then really optimize and improve on what they've got. But yeah, that's the lap times for the first day of the second test. When it comes to what the pecking order is currently, or what I think the pecking order is going into Melbourne, I am going to talk about that tomorrow. In my tomorrow, I will be doing a live stream, same time, 6 p.m. UK time, to review day 2 of the second test. And tomorrow, we're going to get into a lot more of that type of talk of what is the pecking order currently coming out of most of pre-season testing. Of course, we'll still have to go through day 3. I am going to do, remember, a review of pre-season testing, which will probably be uploaded on the channel about this time next week, sometime around then, where I'll probably give another final pecking order for what I think it probably is going into Melbourne. But yeah, I will talk about that a bit more tomorrow, because we are now, what, like, 60-70% of the way through testing. So I think it is all right, say, tomorrow to start talking about a pecking order going into the season itself. In terms of, right now, what my thoughts are, I can see most of the field shaping up in a particular way, but I just want to wait and see, tomorrow, to see, if we get anything new happening in terms of a team showing us a bit more performance that we maybe didn't quite expect. Like, obviously Max is getting in the Red Bull tomorrow, so if Max is able to bang in a really low 133 or a late 132, then that's really going to get people talking about, how quick that Red Bull might possibly be in 2026. So, yeah, we'll wait and see what happens tomorrow. And then, we'll start to talk more about the pecking order and where I think teams are at most likely going into Melbourne. Let me just come back to here. Before I round up the teams and just quickly talk about, where the teams or how the teams did today. There is a poll running in the live chat where I've asked you guys, who do you think has the fastest car right now out of Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari, and Red Bull? Let me know who you think has the fastest car. It doesn't necessarily need to be based on all of the data we've seen so far. Just what's your gut feeling? Who do you think has got the fastest car at this moment and going into, the 2026 season? If you were to push me to an answer, I would still say Mercedes have got the fastest car. But one thing I will say is I don't think they are that far ahead of the next best car, which is probably the McLaren. So, we're not going to get a Mercedes 2014 type season where Mercedes are, a second a lap quicker than the next team. That's not going to happen this season. That is not going to happen. So, yeah. Let me know, who do you think's got the best car right now? And we'll see who you guys have voted for in that poll when we get to the end of the stream. But let me just quickly, do a round of the teams, and then I'll just quickly read out any comments in the chat and answer any questions. So starting with McLaren, good day. Car looked good once again. Oscar Piastri had a good afternoon session in the McLaren. And the McLaren, it looks, handling-wise, it looks very, very nice. It doesn't look like it's got really any handling issues that I can see that are obvious, to be honest. The only thing that McLaren have talked about is they do think they are lacking a bit with their race runs in terms of race pace. Whether that's them sandbagging a bit, and maybe they've actually got a bit more race pace than they've actually shown, or legitimately they think they're a bit further behind other teams with their race pace compared to what they've got over a single lap. We'll have to see. Obviously, the final couple days of testing will show us a bit more whether, they've improved on that or whether they are just sandbagging. But in terms of the one lap pace, I think McLaren have got a fast car. Not the fastest car, but I think it's a fast car that will. I mean, they're going to. The feeling I get with McLaren this season is they're going to have pole positions. They're probably going to win some races. They're not going to be as successful, maybe, as last season, but they are going to be a proper front running contending team. I don't think there's really any doubt in my mind about that. But I think the only thing that is clear with McLaren is that they are not the fastest team like they were a year ago. And that will make things interesting. Of course, McLaren have won the Constructors' Championship the last couple years. Let's go on to the Works Mercedes team, who, I mean, at the minute, you may say are the favourites to win the Constructors' Championship in 2026. Yeah, Mercedes still look really good. No real issues with their car. The handling looks good. The engine performing very well, very reliable, pretty powerful. There just doesn't feel like there's any issues here. Mercedes are, I think, at this point still the... When I say clear favourites, I don't mean they are miles ahead of everyone else, but I think they are by probably a couple tenths or so. I think they are probably the best team out there currently. Yeah, Mercedes, their car just looks very good. The drivers are clearly very happy with it. And yeah, it looks like just a fundamentally very, very good race car. It's going to be obviously interesting throughout the season to see, how many races they'll win and all of that. But I think that's the main thing for Mercedes, coming into this season. I think they always knew that the engine side, they were going to produce a good power unit. They always do. If you look at the last 30 years or so, Mercedes engines are always really strong in terms of, performance. But in terms of the chassis side, I think that was one side they were really hoping to get right in terms of having a fundamentally strong car out of the blocks. And just watching the car on track and hearing, certain things out of the paddock, it really does feel like that, yeah, fundamentally, that Mercedes car is very strong. So, yeah, looking very good for the Silver Arrows. For Red Bull, a decent day. Isaac Hadjar didn't get the most running in today that he probably would have liked. Hadjar is only going to be in the car again for the morning session on day 3, so he won't be able to run in these representative night conditions here in Bahrain again until we come back for the Grand Prix in April. But yeah, tomorrow we get to find out a lot more about what Red Bull have got. Not only tomorrow, but day 3 as well, when Max will be in the car for the afternoon session. We know that when Max is in the car, he is extracting absolutely every drop out of this car. We've seen it for multiple years now. So we will find out in the next couple days, not absolutely officially, but pretty much we will find out what the Red Bull car has performance-wise at this point of the season. And I think Red Bull, they are competitive. There is no doubt about that they've got a competitive car. I just don't think, though, again, in terms of the aero side, I just don't think they've quite got the same level of downforce that McLaren and Mercedes have, and maybe even Ferrari as well. And I think that's going to be something really that we're going to be looking at in these next couple days, because I think the engine that they produced is fantastic, the reliability, the power as well, considering it's the first ever Red Bull powertrain power unit. They've done such a brilliant job. And I don't think people really at this point would deny that the straight line speed is very good, but have they got the downforce to keep them, competitive in all types of tracks and all of that? That's what we're really going to find out in these next couple days, especially with Max Verstappen at the wheel. So, yeah, we'll see how Red Bull do properly in the next couple days. Ferrari, another positive day. They brought an upgrade to the rear of the car, to the diffuser area. A nice looking upgrade, which apparently is worth a tenth or two per lap. And yeah, Ferrari looked absolutely fine out there. There is a lot of positive talk about Ferrari in terms of the car they've got. I do feel, though, that positive talk is mainly because of how negative we all were on them last season. And because they have, they look to be in a stronger position now than they were really at any time last season. And they're also probably a bit stronger now than I think any of us expected them to be. I think that's really where the positivity comes from. I know I saw a couple comments from my last stream where I reviewed the first test. People saying, "Oh, I think you're sleeping on Ferrari a bit." Yeah, maybe I'm underrating Ferrari's ability, in terms of their competitiveness, but I still don't believe that they've got a championship contending car. I really don't believe that they have that. I think they've got, this car is a lot more probably able to win races than the last year's car was. But I just don't think it's quite on the same level as the Mercedes or the McLaren. And it might not even quite be on the same level as the Red Bull. So, we'll have to find out. They're closer to the front of the field now than they were, I think, this time last year. That's a positive, but I still don't think they're at that point where you can say, yeah, Ferrari are going to be championship contenders, like you could say back in 2022. I just don't think we're at that point with Ferrari. But, they are in a better spot than I expected. They are closer to the front of the field than I expected. That is good. And from what I've seen so far, yeah, they probably will win maybe a race or two this season. But, and that is better than last season, obviously, where they didn't win a race. But if you're a Ferrari fan, I still wouldn't really get that excited over this car because it's still a car that is just fundamentally not close enough and on the same level as what are really, I think, the championship contending cars for this year. So, yeah. We'll see what Ferrari do the final couple of days, whether they can show us some extra speed that, maybe we weren't expecting. But, yeah, I still, again, whilst they are probably in a better spot now than they were this time last year, I still don't think they're in a championship contending position. Williams, I think today was really the first day of all of testing where Williams actually showed, I think, mostly, their performance for 2026. And it is good. The Williams car does look competitive. It's not a slow car. Not quite as quick as I was predicting in my early 2026 predictions video, where I thought they would be one of the top 3 quickest cars on the grid, which, looking back now, was very ambitious. But I would say right now, they've probably got one of the top 6 best cars on the grid. The front 4 teams clearly are ahead of them. Mercedes, McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari. And I would say probably Alpine as well. But I think after that, I don't think there's any other teams that are faster than them. I think they are definitely quicker than Cadillac, Aston Martin, definitely quicker than Racing Bulls. The only 2 teams where it's a bit close is Haas and Audi. I think it's a bit close with them, but I think Williams are probably ahead at the minute purely because of having the stronger power unit. So, yeah, Williams are in a decent position. Although, with Williams, I do think that decent position is being held up mostly on the power unit side. So, there is still a lot of work to do with the chassis, I think, of this Williams. If they want to keep up, a good level of performance through this season, I think they really need to, have a good rate of development because, teams like Audi and Aston Martin, pretty sure they'll improve pretty quickly through the season. So they'll want to make sure they don't get overtaken and left behind in any way. But yeah, at this point, Williams, they've got a decent car. It's not a bad car. No way is it a bad car. But again, I think most of that reason is the Mercedes engine. Aston Martin, they're in a better spot now than they were this time last week. No doubt about it. This time last week, they were like 4.5, 5 seconds off the pace. Now they're only 2.5 seconds off, and that's with Lance Stroll, the slower driver. So, they found a lot more performance, but as I said earlier, I think that's purely because they've turned the power unit up more. I don't think it's because they've actually found more performance through upgrades or anything like that. So, yeah, they're getting closer. That's a positive. They're not, they don't look like backmarkers like they did last week. They look like they might be able to get out of Q1 in Australia. But, yeah, it's still not looking good. Still not running enough laps. Still a lot of issues with the handling. And there's still a lot of work to do for Aston Martin. So, yeah, still a difficult situation they're in. But, they're improving. When Alonso gets into the car, I know Alonso was in the car in the morning, but he didn't push at all. He was just doing, I think, some race runs. When Alonso starts to push and do some lower fuel runs, I think we'll start to see at least where the Aston Martin is at to start with, and we'll probably get a decent idea as to whether they can make it out of Q1 in Melbourne. Racing Bulls, still no one ever really talks about them, which I think is quite funny. But as I think alluded to last week, it does feel like they've got one of the slower cars in the field. At the minute, I think the only teams behind them are probably Aston Martin and Cadillac. Maybe Haas as well. I don't think there's that much performance separating those two teams, but yeah, it just doesn't feel to me like Racing Bulls are in a great position. They're not in a terrible position by any means, but yeah, they're definitely not as competitive as they were a year ago. No way. So, yeah, Racing Bulls, hopefully we'll see some more from them in the final couple of days of testing. But yeah, they feel to me like they are either 8th or 9th quickest team at this point. Yeah, Audi next up. As I said earlier, drivers, I think, are a bit disappointed that they're not maybe higher up in that midfield than they are, but they're still not looking that bad. I think if you look at the midfield, it's still looking pretty close between those, midfield teams like Alpine, Williams, Haas, Audi, even Racing Bulls to an extent. Aston Martin, I'm sure, will get in there as well. So it's still pretty close in there. But I think Audi, I don't really, the position they're in, I don't think is that bad, to be honest, at the minute. I think they're probably 7th or 8th best team at the minute. Probably I'm leaning more towards the 7th best team. I think the only teams in the midfield better than them are probably the two Mercedes-powered teams of Williams and Alpine. And if that is the case, and they're ahead of Haas and Racing Bulls and Aston Martin and Cadillac, I think that's a decent position for them to start from, given that we know that they'll improve quite a bit as the season goes on. So, yeah, I think Audi in a decent spot. I think Audi would like to run probably some more laps. as well with this engine. I don't think they've quite got the reliability nailed down. But performance-wise, it's not a bad car. It's probably just not quite as quick as they were hoping. But, you know, one or two big upgrades, and I think they'll be fine in terms of maybe dominating that midfield pack. So, yeah, Audi look fine to me. Haas apparently have said they're going to show some more pace tomorrow. They looked decently quick in the first test. But yeah, today they were backing off a bit more, I think, and focusing more on the longer runs. So yeah, we'll see what they've got tomorrow. But from what I've heard out of Haas, they seem pretty happy with what they've got. Probably a slight bit further ahead at this point than they expected to be. So yeah, Haas seem absolutely fine with where they're at. They are probably as competitive now as they were last season. They're just smack bang in the middle of the midfield. So I don't think they're really bothered about, about where they are at this point, because I think for them, as a smaller team, when the regulations change in the way they have, there is that fear that as a smaller team you can get left behind. But doesn't feel like that's happened for this team, so that's good to see. Alpine had a good day, I would say. Alpine, they're not. I still don't think they're showing quite the pace that they probably do have over a single lap. I think they've got probably the best midfield car. Obviously, Colapinto was in the car in the afternoon and had better conditions. Still did some good lap times, though, considering that he is normally the slower Alpine driver. He was only a 10th off Carlos Sainz in the end. So, yeah, that Alpine looks good. I've heard positive things from some of the F1 TV people, personnel, about the Alpine. So, yeah, I think they've got at least one of the best midfield cars. And I think once Gasly gets in the thing, I think you'll see it really, perform well. And I think you'll see, probably in Melbourne, Alpine having probably at least one car on the top 10. Wouldn't be surprised if they had that whatsoever. So yeah, Alpine looking good as expected. They've been able to reset and obviously got a Mercedes power unit in the back. And finally for Cadillac, as I said earlier, just over 3 seconds off the pace of Mercedes today with their quickest run. I don't think that's that bad, considering, again, new team, completely new team. It's not like they've taken over a pre-existing team. Yeah, Mercedes are not pushing it their quickest, but we don't know if Cadillac are either. So, yeah, I think Cadillac's pace is not too bad. I mean, they're going to be the slowest team in Melbourne. I'm pretty confident of that. Even with Aston Martin's issues, I don't think Aston are going to be troubled by the Cadillac team, because I think the Aston is, through the corners, just a lot better than the Cadillac car is. So, yeah, I think, the Cadillac, it looks good, considering the expectation level that we all should realistically have for them. And considering, again, completely new team, and really, this season and next season is just a learning experience before they get their own power units in, the General Motors power unit, in 2028. And then we'll be able to see what they've really got, long term. But yeah, I think they're doing absolutely fine at the minute. We have to remember, in terms of wind tunnel development time, they're going to have the most of any team between now and the end of June. So if they can use that well, there's no reason why Cadillac maybe can't be, say, at the back of that midfield pack, maybe fighting with one or two teams in certain races. So yeah, they're in a decent spot, I'd say, Cadillac, right now. I still believe they will score points this season, which I know a couple of people were scoffing at in my early predictions video a month ago. I still believe that will happen, but yeah, second half of the season is more likely when you're going to see that probably occur. But yeah, Cadillac, decent start. And, I'll go back to here are the lap times. And yeah, 3.3 off the pace compared to the midfield, within a second of Aston Martin, Haas, Racing Bulls. Again, we don't know fuel loads and engine modes. But yeah, I really don't think that's that bad at this point. So yeah, we'll see where they're at over the next couple of days. But again, realistically, I think everyone has them as the slowest team. Talking of Cadillac, here they are on screen. Very nice livery, I must say. And on track, car doesn't look too bad. It definitely doesn't look like a quick car, but it's not like an obviously bad car or anything like that. So it's not like the 2021 Haas car, which spun at any opportunity. It's not that bad, I would say, in terms of the handling. So yeah, I think Cadillac are in a decent spot at this point of their Formula One venture, as they're only just about dipping their toes in at this point. But let me just go through the few comments in the chat, and then we'll get to the end of this stream. Hello to all of you that have watched tonight. Rook's asking, are all the teams running at full revs now, Chazza? I think certain teams have probably run at full revs, but only briefly. They're not running at full revs for like a sustained amount of time, like they will, obviously, when we get to qualifying and the race in Melbourne. But I think on occasion they are using the full revs to just try and test the limits of their power units. These power units have been a lot more reliable than I think a lot of people expected. So yeah, pretty decent reliability. Even we've took the piss out of Honda for being terrible so far, but I mean they've still done quite a few laps. It's not like they've only done 10 laps per day like the McLaren Honda 10 years ago. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there in terms of the comments. Let me just quickly finish up this poll in the chat. And I asked you guys, who has the fastest car right now? 19 votes, and 37% of the vote, you guys have voted for Mercedes-Benz as having the fastest car. 32% for Ferrari, 26% for Red Bull, and only 5% for McLaren, interestingly. But yeah, still, for me, from what I've seen so far, I still think Mercedes have got the best car. And if things continue as they are, then my opinion is not going to change on that. And if pre-season testing had finished today, then I would be sitting here saying Mercedes are going to take pole position, most likely in Melbourne. Not by a lot, though. Again, I don't think there is that big of a gap between them and McLaren, which is, I think, going to provide a lot of the fun, let's say, this season. We are going to have a competitive fight for the championship. I'm pretty sure of that at this point. Anyway, that's it for this review of day one of the second pre-season test. Just to let you guys know, I'll be back live tomorrow at 6 p.m. UK time, same time, to review day two, where we'll go through whatever's happened on day two. We'll go through the best lap times of every team. We'll do a roundup of the teams and how they've done. And also, we'll go through the pecking order in terms of what I think the pecking order is going into 2026 at the point of the finish of day two. Obviously, something could happen on day three which changes my opinion as to who is the third quickest team or the sixth quickest team. And that's why when I do my review of testing, obviously I might change my opinion on a couple things. But I will do pretty much tomorrow a pecking order prediction for where I think people are at. And I think definitely with Max getting in the Red Bull tomorrow, I think we'll get a much better idea, especially in that front running part of the field where people are at going into the first Grand Prix. So yeah, that's a plan for tomorrow. Remember, on the final day of testing on Friday, I will be doing the first watch along of 2026, where I'll be doing a watch along for the final 2 hours of preseason testing. I'll be going live at 2 p.m. UK time, and we'll be live for the final 2 hours of the final test of preseason testing. Might have Niblo, my co-commentator, as usual, on. Depends on his availability. And then, after that, obviously, a couple more weeks until the first Grand Prix. Yeah, make sure to join me tomorrow at 6 p.m. UK time to go over day 2 of the final preseason test in 2026. Been great to see you all. Hope you all have a good rest of your day. Make sure to smash a like button on this stream before you go. Make sure to subscribe for more content like this, because we're going to be doing plenty of content in the next couple of weeks, building into obviously the 2026 Formula 1 season. And guys, until my review of day 2 tomorrow at 6 p.m. UK time, it has been me, Shazza HD. Goodbye.